Life in the countryside has always been my dream. At least it was, until the HOA came along. The problem started slowly, like an annoying itch that you ignore at first, but by the time you realize it, it's become an open sore. One day, an envelope showed up in my mailbox, all formal, full of pompous phrases about visual harmony of the community and rules for maintaining neighborhood standards. I read it laughing, finding it funny how some people think they can boss others around. My farm was not part of the HOA. That meant that, legally, they had no power over me. So I threw that paper straight in the trash and went on with my life. But they insisted. The tickets started appearing weekly, each one more annoying than the last. Farm animals are not appropriate for this community. We request their removal. We ask you to join the HOA to maintain neighborhood standards. If the association's guidelines are not followed, we will take the necessary action. The necessary measures. As if I were a rude employee who needed a warning. Except I wasn't anyone's employee. My land was mine. My animals were well looked after, and no one was going to tell me what I could or couldn't have on my property. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. So I did what any sensible person would do. I continued to ignore them. If they thought they were going to shout me down, they were sorely mistaken. But then they crossed the line. It was an ordinary morning. The sun had barely risen when I left the house to feed the animals. I walked out onto the balcony, stretched out my arms, and smelled the damp earth. A day like any other, or at least it should have been. I took 2 steps towards the paddock, and the silence hit me like a punch in the stomach. There was no sound. No mooing from the cows, no clucking from the chickens, not even the sound of the horses kicking the ground as they always did in the morning. I felt a chill run down my spine. I ran to the corral. It was empty. I went to the chicken coop. Nothing. I opened the stable doors. No trace of my horses. I stood still for a moment, trying to process the scene. It was as if someone had erased my animals from existence. The paddock, where the cows used to graze, was completely open, and the fence was cleanly cut, with no sign of forced entry. That wasn't an accident. That was theft, and it didn't take a genius to guess who was behind it. I drove home, feeling my heart beating harder and harder. I took control of the camera system and started reviewing the recordings from the night before. What I saw almost made me explode with rage. At around 3 in the morning, a black pickup truck pulled into my lot. 2 men got out, cut the fence, and started leading the animals into the vehicle. It was an organized, quick process, as if they had done this before. But the worst thing wasn't them. The worst thing was the woman who was supervising everything. There she was, the bloody president of the HOA, standing with her arms crossed, watching the operation with a satisfied smile on her face. She didn't even try to hide it. I watched the recording with my mouth open, feeling the anger boil up inside me. She really did it. She really thought she could just take my animals away because she didn't like them, because she didn't like seeing a farm near her precious community. She really believed she had the right to take something that was mine, and what's worse, she thought she was going to get away with it. I blinked a few times, trying to calm down. I picked up the phone, thinking about calling the police, but then I stopped. This wasn't a simple robbery. This wasn't just a matter of getting my animals back. This was war. And if this woman thought she could bend me over, thought she could intimidate me, thought she could rule what was mine, then she was about to learn a lesson she would never forget. Because I wasn't just going to get my animals back, I was going to make sure she never tried anything like that again in her life. And in the end, she would be the one to pay for it all. I could have called the police right then. I could have taken that video, taken it straight to the authorities, and let justice sort it out. But it wasn't just a crime. It was personal. She didn't break into my property in the middle of the night out of necessity. She didn't steal my animals by accident. She did it to punish me. Because, in her mind, I was challenging her little dictatorship. She thought that if she took something important to me, I would learn my lesson, that I would be afraid, that I would bend over and accept the HOA's rules like an obedient little lamb. But I wasn't a lamb. And now, she had just poked a bull. I grabbed my hat, threw a coat over my clothes, and left. I already knew exactly where she was keeping my animals. The month before, she had rented a plot of land at the entrance to the neighborhood, saying she wanted to preserve the local aesthetic and turn the area into a community space. But I knew it was an excuse. In reality, she wanted to control any piece of land she could, and now my animals were there. The difference was that, contrary to what she thought, I wasn't going to ask for it back. I was going to take it back. The counterattack, I drove to the site with the headlights off, parking the truck a safe distance away. The land was fenced, but there was no security. After all, no one expected someone to break in to take back what was theirs. I saw my cows there, the horses in the makeshift paddock, the chickens trapped in a ridiculous structure that she probably thought served as a chicken coop. She really believed she had won. I took a deep breath and jumped out of the truck. I knew that if I did this the right way, I'd not only get my animals back, but I'd make her regret it forever. I opened the fence and started with what was easiest, the chickens. They didn't need much encouragement to run back to freedom. It only took opening the structure for them to start scattering across the land. Total chaos. I moved on to the cows. With a simple whistle, they recognized me and began to move, peacefully. The biggest problem was the horses. I knew that if they ran off, they could end up getting hurt or going in the wrong direction. So I patiently approached them, petted their heads, and guided each one to the exit, just as we did every day on the farm. Everything was going perfectly well, until the damn woman appeared. I heard the sound of hurried footsteps, and, when I looked up, there she was, in her robe and slippers, holding a flashlight and looking around as if she'd heard a gunshot. When she saw me, her face contorted in shock and hatred. "What are you doing?" she screamed, running towards me. I calmly continued what I was doing, locking up the truck while the horses were already safe. "Taking back what's mine," I replied, unhurriedly. She looked around, noticing that the cows were already outside, and the chickens were scattered around the field. "This is invasion!" she shouted. "You cannot be here!" I crossed my arms. "And you can steal my animals?" She froze. She opened and closed her mouth a few times, unable to find an answer. That was a claim," she said, trying to hold her pose. "Your animals were outside the HOA's standards, so we took steps to ensure that they were in a more suitable environment." I laughed, not believing what I was hearing. "So you think kidnapping animals is now part of the HOA rules?" She took a deep breath, her face turning red. "You can't just take them back." "Yes, I can." She clenched her fists, her eyes burning with anger. "I'll call the police." That was my cue to really laugh. "Oh, please do. I want to see you explain to them why you're keeping stolen cattle here." Her eyes widened. She knew that if the police showed up, I wouldn't be the one in trouble. "What do you want?" she growled, like a cornered dog. At last. Now we were on to my game. I approached her, unafraid, and looked her right in the eye. "I want compensation for every animal you've stolen." She laughed nervously. "You've got to be kidding." "I'm not. You've already got your animals back. You've wasted my time, my money. I've had to cancel deals because my animals are gone. If you want to play the authoritarian leader, then you'll learn that every action has a consequence." She stayed still, breathing fast. I could see the battle going on inside her head. If she paid me, she'd be admitting she'd made a mistake. If she didn't, I would sue her and destroy her reputation in the HOA. She was surrounded. And then, the inevitable happened. She agreed. "Minus I need time." I gave a short smile. "You have 24 hours. If the money isn't in my account by tomorrow, I'll go to the police station and the local newspaper with the security footage." She knew I wasn't joking. I turned around and climbed into the truck, leaving her there, alone, in the middle of the field, surrounded by chickens that clucked non-stop. The next day, the payment appeared in my account. A very generous sum, which not only covered any loss I might have had, but also left me with a profit. And I knew she hated every second of it. But the best was yet to come. Because now, with that financial confession, I had something even more valuable than money. I had control over her, and I was going to enjoy it to the last penny. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the bank notification. I picked up my cell phone and smiled when I saw the updated balance. She had indeed paid. The amount was there, shining on the screen, proof that, at the end of the day, I had won. The woman who had spent months trying to bend me over, forcing her ridiculous rules on the neighborhood, thought she could teach me a lesson by stealing my animals. But now, not only did she have to give them back, she had to pay me for it. The satisfaction I felt was greater than any revenge I could have planned. But that still wasn't enough for me. She could have simply accepted that my farm wasn't under HOA rules. She could have gone on with her life, worrying about her condo friends' perfect white fences and impeccable lawns. But she wanted to provoke me. And now, I wanted to make sure she never forgot that lesson. It wasn't enough to win. I wanted her to know that she had lost. I finished my coffee, put on my jacket, and went to her house. When I knocked on the door, I heard hurried footsteps inside. For a moment, I almost laughed. I bet she was hoping she'd never have to face me again. The door opened, and there she was, pale as a ghost. She didn't say anything at first. She just stared at me, tense, as if waiting to see what I was going to do. I crossed my arms and gave a short smile. I got paid. She let out the breath she was holding, relaxing her shoulders. That's great. So that means we're even. I tilted my head, pretending to think. No. Her body stiffened. What? I took a step forward, only to see the discomfort increase on her face. You didn't think you could just pay me and be done with it, did you? That I'd just forget all about it? She blinked a few times, processing my words. But you said that if I paid you, you wouldn't do anything. I said that if you paid, I wouldn't go to the police. Shock washed over her face. I knew exactly what was going on in her head. For the first time, she realized that she wasn't in control of the situation. What do you want now? I let a smile escape. I want something very simple. I lowered my voice, looking straight into her eyes. I want you and your damn association to leave me alone. She opened her mouth, but I held up my hand, stopping whatever excuse was about to come out. No tickets, no notifications, no ridiculous complaints. From now on, my farm doesn't exist for you. Her eyes narrowed. That's blackmail. I laughed softly. No, blackmail would be if I used this story to make you lose your position in the HOA. If I went to the local papers with a video showing you stealing private property. She took a deep breath, trying to regain control. You're threatening me. No, I'm warning you. The woman clenched her fists, her eyes full of anger, but said nothing. She knew I was right. She knew that if the HOA kept bothering me, I had everything I needed to blow this story up, and I knew I couldn't do anything about it. We sat in silence for a few seconds, just staring at each other. Then, finally, she gave in. All right, I crossed my arms. All right, what? She swallowed. The HOA will leave you alone. I took a step back and smiled. Good, but I want it in writing. The hateful look she gave me was the icing on the cake, but in the end, she had no choice. The next day, an envelope was delivered to my door. Inside was a formal document, signed by the HOA, stating that my farm was officially exempt from any regulation by the association, and that there would be no further interference of any kind. As soon as I finished reading it, I framed the paper and hung it on my living room wall. It was my trophy, proof that no one is the boss of me. And I knew that every time she saw my farm, every time she heard the sound of the cows, horses, and chickens living happily on my land, she would remember that she had lost. But the funniest thing of all, that story wasn't over yet, because I could be satisfied. But I knew she was still swallowing this defeat, and the HOA wasn't going to be able to accept that for long. I just had to wait. Over the next few days, the neighborhood was quieter than ever. No ridiculous notes appeared in my mailbox, no idiotic notices were left on my gate, and, for the first time in months, the HOA pretended that my farm didn't exist. But I knew it wasn't a gesture of goodwill. They were licking their wounds. The woman lost. She was forced to pay, to sign a document that left me untouchable. And now, she had no choice but to swallow her pride. But what I liked to remember most was how much it ate her up inside. The very fact that my farm was still standing, with my animals living happily in the pasture, was a daily reminder of her humiliation. And the HOA? Ah, those so-called kings of the neighborhood also had their tails between their legs. After all, if the other residents found out that the leader of the association had spent money to cover up a theft she herself had committed, it would be the end of her reputation. But I wasn't satisfied with just silence. I wanted to make sure she never tried anything like this again in her life. So I started my own little game.